You're welcome back. Thank you very much for joining us. And this is Newsfile, your most authoritative news analysis show. Is brought to you by Bank of Africa, MTN, Sasso Spray, Star Assurance, Lipton Tea, and Yum Vita. Now, I read some of your messages that concern this issue, the doctor strike, and then we will now move on to deal with a 40-year plan for Ghana, and tell you the other perspectives that are coming in as far as persons like Professor H. Kwesi Prempeh are concerned. They think that we don't need it. You must have heard Imani's Franklin Kujo say, forget it, it's not important. All you need is to implement the little things that we have that to take care of. This one says, who has the mandate to determine conditions of service, the employer or the employee? The GMA leadership erred. They ought to have demanded one thing at a time. Can we all claim better conditions of service at a go? From Cletus in Afram Plains. Government communicators keep blaming doctors and nurses for going on strike, but none has given any positive responses on the part of government to settle the matter amicably. This one says, I would like to know whose job it is to update the president on current situations in Ghana. This is from Peter in Takrady. And Peter, I join you in that worry, particularly because we have had the president seem to give deadlines that have failed and all of those things. And now talking about a budget that Kofi Adams is doing just the impossible to rationalize. This one says, it is only in Ghana that an employee goes on strike because of future conditions of service and not the current conditions of service. Okay, T Smart in Wetlands. And then, while doctors need fuel to save lives, government communicators use fuel for free. What exactly are our priorities as a nation? Doctors should not be employees of the government. They should quit, agree professional consultation rates that will apply nationally for every grade and specialization, and offer their services to any private or public sector facility willing to pay them. That's what other professionals do, and they make a living largely independent of many states. This is quite a long one, but I'll read some part of it. It says that our leaders, MPs, politicians, CEOs, and other heads of institutions have put their well-being, welfare, present and future comfort at the helms of affairs. The ordinary men and women do not form part of their roles as leaders. They fly abroad to South Africa, Europe, and America for treatment, and they even go with doctors from here. Why can't we improve the healthcare system? Okay, Egbert Faber was just saying that by importing the modern health care equipment and other necessary gadgets. No, they prefer to buy 4x4 cars, aircraft for their own comfort. What laws can stop them from this unpatriotic practice? These are some of the reasons why things are getting worse. Teachers, nurses, doctors, pharmacists, midwives, lecturers are as important as the politician, and some of these professionals, when they become MPs, forget to fight the cause of their colleagues. When only strikes can make a slight difference, I rest my case. And doesn't want his mouth to be a gun. All right. Thank you indeed for all of those messages that you have brought in. And the police want me to let you know that there are conditions of service that have been put out there. You should not be deceived by them, because they barely get 90% of what has been published, even though that is what they are due. Some of them say what they get is far less than even 90% of what you find in their conditions of service. Well, let's give it to the doctors and then don't implement it and see what happens in that regard. Dr. Nimoy Thompson, the Director General of the NDPC, joins us. Thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Thank you for having me.
You had a very colorful ceremony, well attended.
We appreciate it.
And you sought to, shift the nation's psyche to the need for a long-term program for development. Now, there's been some criticism that is coming in, and I'll just share a few with you. I'll read one from H. Kwesi Prempeh. He's a professor of law and teaches in the United States of America. He says that the most the NDPC can aim to do is take the directive principles of state policy together with the progressive realization of social and economic rights provisions of Chapter 5 of the Constitution, do a baseline study of where the country stands on these goals, and develop and propose milestones, indicators, and timelines to assist political parties and administrations to consider in their development of their manifestos, policies, and programs. That is the most technocratic, unelected, and these are carefully chosen words, that is the most a technocratic, unelected, unaccountable body can aim to accomplish in a system based on democratic politics. You cannot entrench development plan in a constitution and thereby make it legally binding. This is a fanciful thought. He says, personally, I am against having the National Development Planning Commission, NDPC, in the constitution in the first place. And I have stated so publicly and in writing. I think when it comes to commissions or vastly constitutions over constitutionalized by having all manner of presidential advisory bodies or commissions established in or by the Constitution. At best, the NDPC must be a statutory body established only by an Act of Parliament, so that if and when we no longer think we need it, we can save ourselves the expense simply by repealing the statute establishing it, without going through the trouble of a constitutional amendment. Not everything that may be desirable belongs in a constitution. He had a lot to say, but I'll read just one more portion of some of the comments that he put out. He says that he says that I must say there are legion when we are talking about plans and programs that have come in. In 2011, in one of 2 papers that he wrote under the auspices of the CDD for submission to the Constitution Review Commission, this is what I had to say about the NDPC and how to ensure that at the minimum we get some value for money from its existence. Absence of linkage between annual budget and a medium or long-term national development strategy / plan. A recurring criticism of budgets and budgeting in contemporary Ghana is the absence of a linkage between annual budgets and a medium or long-term national development or strategic plan. Although currently annual budgets in Ghana are formulated presumably within a 3-year expenditure framework, the investment allocation decisions and preferences reflected in the budget do not have a policy basis or strategic direction in any coherent medium or long-term national plan about which there is a settled or agreed political or national consensus. I'll be sharing some of what he has to say as we move on. But bottom line, he says this is fanciful and we should just forget about it. Let's go ahead and make sure that when we give out our budgets, we stick to them and implement them, among others. We have heard Imani also come to say we don't need this 40-year development plan. You have heard others say that by Akufo-Addo's posture in the lead up to the 2012 elections, he will not implement any such thing.
If he wins.
Yes, that is if he wins.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I've listened to what you read. I wasn't too clear as to the thrust of Professor Kwesi Prempeh's argument. He seemed to vacillate all over. In fact, if you listen carefully, he actually does make the case for a long-term national development plan as we are proposing it. But let's look at the issues he raises on two levels.
No, in due course, I will share with you, and that's no problem. I may be to blame.
No, you are not to blame. I've actually read. No, I read a lot of his stuff. In fact, the very first time the news came out, he wrote a long piece criticizing a technocratic document by NDPC when there was no such document. Okay. I pointed that out on Facebook, and since then he's actually modified his position. So there are two things: the law as it exists now, and what he would wish to see. Now, let me just take you through the legal basis of what we are doing as NDPC and what the law actually requires.
Okay. Let's start. Preface, because we did that the last time.
Oh, you did? Okay, yes. No problem. I'll just give you the highlights of it. The Constitution, the laws, and so forth. The Constitution says that NDPC must make proposals for the development of multi-year rolling plans. That's the right. Constitution. It's part of it. And then after you've made the plans, you should monitor, evaluate, coordinate development policies, programs, and projects. And then Act 479, which actually sets up NDPC, says that it must, among other things, formulate comprehensive national development planning strategies and ensure that the strategies, including consequential policies and programs, are effectively carried out. And then H says, prepare broad national development plans. So that's Act 479. And then we have the CRC recommendations. You've already gone through that. Act 815, the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, and what it says. Perhaps I should devote a bit of time to it. It says the allocation of the annual spending amount from the petroleum revenue shall, among other things, be, quote, guided by a medium-term expenditure framework aligned with the long-term national development plan approved by Parliament. So this is not what Kwesi Prempeh wishes or what anybody else wishes, but what the law says. So perhaps he may want to attack the law itself and not what NDPC and other state organizations are doing in accordance with the law as it exists. And then it says the exact percentage of the benchmark revenue, and it goes on and on, shall be guided by a medium-term development strategy. First, it's an expenditure framework. Now we move to a strategy, which is a medium-term plan, aligned with the long-term national development plan. That's the second one. The third one says the Act further says that for any financial year, a minimum of 70% of the annual budget funding amount shall be used for public investment expenditures consistent with the long-term national development plan. And then it defines that. A national development plan is defined in the Act as a plan prepared by the National Development Planning Commission. We are not in violation of the law in any way whatsoever. So if the professor of constitutional law in the States has issues, perhaps he needs to review these things so he appreciates the legal context. Now, in terms of the long term, let me just emphasize that when you say 40 years or 20 years or 30 or even 10, it doesn't mean that you are going to wait until the 40th year before you wake up and do what that needs to be done. Everything everyone is saying we should focus on, if we were to pass a long-term national development plan today, whatever we are doing today will be part of it. But there's this conception that because it's a 40-year plan, it's out there into the future, and so we should do whatever. No, it is part of it. There's a first year for the 40 years, and then a second, and then a third, and so forth and so on. So the two are not mutually exclusive. Whatever we do today, in fact, a lot of the problems we are having today, doom solve, spatial planning issues, and it's precisely because we did not plan 40 years ago. And it is important that we look into the future because in 2 years, 2017, we'll be celebrating our 60th anniversary. That will be a moment for reflection. That's what we're proposing. And then also in 2018, whether there's a long-term national development plan or not, there will be the next medium-term plan. As I speak with you, we're in the midst of the current one, 2014 to 2017. And then 2018, there will be another one. All the previous medium-term plans have stood alone. So the linkages and the strategic context have been absent. And that has contributed to the challenges we face in planning. So in 2018, there will be a medium-term plan with or without a long-term national development plan. The advantage of situating it in the long-term national development plan is that you get to understand the future as it shall evolve. And I'll show you this thing in a second. Because our population is growing, urbanization is also raging on. By 2015, we reckon that 90% of our populations will be living in urban areas. We need to plan for that now. Edbert, some time ago, I was on the show with him, and he mentioned Gan West. I know Bawe as Gan Rural. This several years ago, if you remember, the 1984 census described Bawe as Gan Rural. Look at Bawe now. Doesn't look like a rural place. Fancy, expensive buildings, but no planning. The roads are bad, the sewage system virtually. And is that the kind of future we want? No, we need to begin to plan now. Now, secondly, understand that we are not the only ones planning long-term. China, do you know that China has a 100-year development plan? There's a book called The 100-Year Marathon, and it explains China's own long-term national development aspirations and how it's sought to do that, including the long-term objective of actually overtaking the US as the largest economy. They set 2049 as the terminal year for that. And so everything you see the Chinese doing in Ghana, in Africa, and part of is part of the realization of that long-term national development plan. The two are not exclusive. If anything, the short-term and immediate term actually reflect what is going on. Turkey, they started in 1966. And they have an ambition to actually have certain presence around the world. So among the strategies is actually the government of Turkey paying or subsidizing Turkish businesses to improve or increase their presence. These days, I'm sure you see all the Turkish garages in Accra and so forth. It's part of Turkish strategy for global presence. You go to Pig Farm Junction. What do you see there? Total filling station. And what ATM cash machines do they have there? SGSSB is part of the French long term. Things are happening, but because we don't think in strategic terms, because our whole focus is in the short term, we tend to lose the bigger picture. And so we've started doing that. I don't know if your camera can pick this up. I can maybe show this. This is basically, we have started projections. Rather than sitting and just worry about what is going on, you see here that we've projected the population, the levels of population up to 2015. That's about 46 million. We need to start preparing for that now. We can't wait until 2-3 years before that, before we begin to do that. The bottom line, the bottom graph is the rate of urbanization in Ghana. 90% by the year 2050. As I speak with you now, the only region in Ghana with a 90% urbanization rate is Greater Accra. 90%. And Accra itself is 100%. Accra and Lodjikuku and all that, that's 100%. Now look at the challenges they're facing because we didn't plan. And you're telling me that we should just sit there and worry about incrementalism, which is also another approach to managing development. Incrementalism, it wouldn't work. All over the world, there's another thing I have here, which is from the OECD Europe. They have made projections to 2060. 2060. They have a sense of how each and every economy is going to look. Is it a perfect forecast? No. Is it perfect projections? No. But it gives you a rough guideline for how you plan your goals. So in the case of Ghana, even before we've gone ahead with the long-term national development plan, when I spoke at the international conference, I also made reference to the fact that we have a national spatial development framework. This is how we envision. There are so many things that we have, but this is just one. How we envision Ghana to be 10 different urban areas with infrastructure, with logistics. As we sit here in Ghana, our logistics system is virtually undeveloped. We need to make a conscious effort, transportation, storage, distribution, packaging. We need to do all these things. Infrastructure, in addition to this framework, we're also developing a long-term national infrastructure plan that will range between 25 and 30 years. You do not develop infrastructure in 4 years. Sometimes even the conceptualization, preparation, feasibility studies will take you 5 to 6 years. So we are talking about long term, where rail lines will be all over the place. I mentioned that thing in just...
Is it fair to require, like Prof suggests, that you should be able to give us a baseline study of where the country stands as far as these goals are concerned?
Yes.
And we are talking about the progressive realization of the social and economic rights that the Constitution gives us, so that we take off on that point and say, this is where we don't have this particular facility and we need it.
Precisely. We've done that. This study, and it's on our website, the social development. The executive summary itself is quite extensive, and it's there. The thing is, some of the most vociferous critics have either not read the relevant documents, or they read it but did not understand it. That's what pains me. There was one person I had a 1-hour interview with, and he chose not to understand anything I said. And he's going around rather trashing the thing. But it's a tragedy in a sense, but then again, we find consolation in the fact that that's the nature of the business of development. Let me just share something with you, just so you know that there's a price. We don't want to be caught on the wrong side of history. I'm sure you're familiar with the Eiffel Tower in Paris,
right?
Which is like the soul, the embodiment of France today. Let me read to you what the critics of the Eiffel Tower said in 1887 when it was being built. They said, "We, writers, painters, sculptors, architects, and passionate devotees of the hitherto untouched beauty of Paris, protest with all our strength, with all our indignation in the name of slighted French taste against the erection of this useless and monstrous Eiffel Tower." And then they go on and trash the whole thing. Imagine if they had listened to them. Today, the Eiffel Tower, 2,500 visitors per day, close to 10 million visitors a year, billions of dollars in revenue from tourists per year. So as FDR said, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. We need to plan. Now, to answer the question that H. Henry Kwesi Prempeh raised, we've done that. We've extracted the vision, the goals, and everything from the directive principles of state policy. And right. I spoke about that.
And one of his major concerns is where, for example, you have the IEA speaking through Dr. Ransford Jampo, that this policy or plan will fail eventually, that when we have this plan, it will fail if it is not made binding by constitutional enjoinment. And that's where Prof says you cannot, require that it be made binding.
That's his view. There are several other views out there. The CRC has a lot of recommendations. So let's not behave as if, I respect Professor Kwesi Prempeh, but his word is not gospel. We shouldn't behave as if because he said it, it is the truth and there's no other truth out there. It's simply one view. And let's look at it that way. The law, 815, says that the long-term national development plan must be approved by Parliament. Parliament certainly carries a lot more gravitas than Professor Prempeh, with all due respect.
Yes, but so when he gives you a view with sufficient enough credible basis, that is good to use.
That's his personal view.
Yes, for the discussion as we are doing.
Now, terrific. Now you raise a somewhat different issue. The consultations will begin next week. We'll start with the Ashanti region. We've already made provision on our website for Ghanaians anywhere in the world to make contributions, including the good professor. And at the appropriate time, we'll collate everything, we'll bring it to the commission, the commissioners themselves, we'll have technical consultations and so forth. We may even share it with the CRC implementation
we'll take a quick break here. We'll return, I'll hear briefly from Egbert, and then we'll deal a lot more with Prof.
But do you mind if I just wrap this part up? Because it's also the issue of visualization.
Right.
Why? Because the long term obviously has a lot of stuff that you don't know. And so you need to, one of the recommendations we made was that Parliament must have 4 different periods of revision for the long term, which I must emphasize is derived from the Constitution. The vision, just, free, and prosperous society, is based on the directive principles of state policy. We didn't pull that from thin air. The goals specified in there come from the directive principles of state policy. Now, after that, you have the 10 medium-term development plans that each government must implement, because whatever it is, there's going to be medium-term plans. All we are saying is that situate them within the long-term strategic framework so that you anticipate potential threats. And I'll just show you that this is Europe, 60 years into the future. And so they have a global view of what's going to, and we sit here and want to move on, just crawl along. Before we know it, we've been overtaken. And that's part of the problem.
The questions are also being asked about whether or not you've taken a view of what exactly happened to the non-implementation to the 5- and 7-year plans. And also, is it in 2007 when the Kufuor administration also did is it a 50-year or so budget? Yes. A budget. It's a budget. It's a budget that he provided for the country. We'll be right back.